You owe the HOA $8,200 for using our lake.
Our lake?
Not anymore. This lake never belonged to the HOA. It belongs to my parents. And here's 11 years of stolen money.
James's fishing hat was still on the hook by the back door. 4 months since the heart attack. I still couldn't move it. Every morning I walked past it on my way to make coffee, and every evening I walked past it on my way to the dock. Sitting at the water's edge had become my version of grief therapy. James had loved that lake. Watching it felt like the closest thing to sitting beside him. I had no idea that lake was about to save everything. My name is Margaret Holloway, 58 years old, principal of Riverside Elementary for 19 years. My husband James and I bought our property at Cedar Lake Estates in 1987, when the subdivision was still being carved out of Georgia farmland. The developer told us the private lake came with the property. We raised our daughter Sarah in that house. James fished that lake every weekend for 37 years. Diane Prescott had been HOA president at Cedar Lake Estates for 11 years. White Cadillac, designer blazers on Saturdays, the kind of woman who scheduled board meetings at times when working families couldn't attend, and passed resolutions nobody had voted on. She had increased dues 3 times since taking office, each increase announced as a community improvement initiative, each one funding things nobody could quite identify on the budget sheet. 6 weeks after James's funeral, Diane arrived at my door with a certified letter. Lake access fee delinquency notice. Apparently, I owed 11 years of monthly lake access fees at $45 per month. $5,940, plus late penalties, bringing the total to $8,200. I told her calmly that lake access had always been included in our property deed. She smiled the way people do when they think they've already won. Times change, Margaret. The HOA restructured lake access 11 years ago. You should have been paying all along. I called my daughter that evening. Sarah dropped everything and flew home from Chicago with a laptop and legal pads and the focused energy of someone who had inherited her father's instinct for not letting things go. We spent the weekend in the county courthouse basement, pulling every document that had ever touched our property. James would have loved watching his daughter work. She had his eyes, and his stubbornness, and his absolute refusal to accept something that didn't add up. Our original 1987 deed was crystal clear. The lake was not a community amenity. It was private property conveyed directly to James and Margaret Holloway as part of the original land purchase. The HOA had never owned the lake. They had no legal authority to charge access fees for water that belonged to us. But what Sarah found next stopped us both cold. 11 years of monthly lake access fee collection, 212 families, $45 per month, $540 annually per household. Over 11 years, the HOA had collected $114,000 in lake access fees for a lake they didn't own. The money had flowed into a special amenities fund that Diane controlled exclusively. No board oversight, no annual audit, no disbursement records. Dorothy Chen had been paying lake access fees since the program began. 91 years old, fixed income. Her hands trembled when Sarah showed her what the fees had actually paid for. Nothing, Sarah said gently. They were paying to use a lake that already belonged to someone else. Dorothy sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, I knew something was wrong. James always said that lake belonged to the Holloways. He was right about that, I told her. He was right about most things. My attorney filed the ownership claim on a Monday. The HOA's response came from Diane's personal lawyer rather than the HOA's general counsel. That told us everything about who had been personally profiting. Federal investigators had already been looking at Diane's finances after an anonymous complaint from a former board member. Our documentation gave them what they needed to close the case. At the emergency board meeting Diane called to address the ownership dispute, she walked in with the confidence of someone who had spent 11 years getting away with things. She launched into her presentation about community standards and proper documentation and the legal complexities of historical property interpretation. Then Sarah stood up and placed our 1987 deed on the table beside a spreadsheet showing 11 years of unauthorized fee collection traced to Diane's personal accounts. The room went completely silent. Diane looked at the spreadsheet for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I felt nothing dramatic, just tired and sad for the years of grief she had tried to pile on top of grief. Federal agents served the warrant as the meeting adjourned. Diane received 3 years federal prison for wire fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. Full restitution to every family who had paid unauthorized lake access fees. Every dollar returned. Dorothy received her 11 years of payments back in a single check. She used it to fix her roof, which had been leaking for 2 winters because she couldn't afford the repairs. The lake returned to its proper legal status. Our property, open to neighbors at our discretion without fees or HOA interference. I sit at the dock every evening still. The water looks the same as it always did. Blue herons landing in the shallows. Bass jumping at dusk. The sound James loved that I have been learning to love on his behalf. Last Sunday, I finally moved his fishing hat. Not to a box, not to a closet. To the dock. The wooden post at the end, where he always hung it when he sat down to fish. It looks like it belongs there. It does.